Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. Something big is going to happen in the Zaporozhye direction because we continue receiving additional updates from the Russian side. The video was published during the previous 12 hours, and in this video we can see a number of FPV drone attacks on Ukrainian positions, on Ukrainian tanks that were hitting Ukrainian artillery forces and so on. So we can see that the Ukrainians continue the concentration of their forces and the Russians continue bombing and attacking them. I'll remind you that during the previous few days, Zelensky reported that he has completed the victory plan, and according to him, the points of the victory plan are more than 90% written out. The next week it will be presented to the allies. So Zelensky is in a hurry because he understands that the situation in the Kursk direction is very critical. Something big might happen in the Zaporozhye direction, and furthermore, according to Syrsky and according to information that can be found in the open sources, the Syrsky commander-in-chief is removing and transferring additional brigades and units to the Sumy region, Kursk direction, as well as to the Pokrovsk direction. We will only add that they are being pulled from everywhere. For example, they were removed from Kherson and from the Odessa-Mykolaiv region, since they, Ukrainians, believe that the Russians are unlikely to push in large forces in these directions in the next 2-3 months. Syrsky is trying to save the situation and hold the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine until Zelensky goes to the United States and holds a meeting with Biden where he will present his victory plan. And I'll remind you that according to information we have, the NATO countries, for example the United Kingdom, still hasn't authorized Ukrainians to use the Western weapon deep inside the territory of Russia. Britain will not agree to give the permission for long-range strikes deep into Russia with its weapon without the US the times. NATO countries do not yet have a consensus on inviting Ukraine to the alliance that was stated by Stoltenberg. Furthermore, as we know, the United States of America still hasn't authorized Ukraine to do this as well. As for NATO, we have additional statements. Sometimes they're very funny. For example, NATO will not become part of the conflict if alliance countries allow Ukraine to strike Russian territory with Western weapons. For example, Putin and Russian authorities have completely opposite point of view, and according to Putin, if Ukraine starts using NATO weapon deep inside the territory of Russia, that means that NATO is involved deeply in this conflict. Now let's continue with the situation on the ground, and as for the South Donetsk direction, we haven't received anything during the previous 24 hours, and this operational pause is very scaring. Now let's talk about the Kurakhova direction. Today we got some geolocation, some updates. For example, the Ukrainian sources published the video how they were FPV droning and how they were attacking the Russian forces around the village of Zhelanное Pershe. This is very important video because Zhelanное Pershe was captured by the Russians a few days ago, but just the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation was the only source that provided this information. And today we got at least 2 additional updates that confirms the situation. First, the video that we've just seen, and the report by Deep State. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Pokrovsk, the original Pokrovsk direction. And according to information we have, the Russians, as a result of very heavy clashes, managed to establish complete control over the landfill that is located in the northeastern part of the city of Novogrodovka. So the territory was captured by the Russians and the territory was colored completely in Russian control color. As for the city of Grodovka, we also have additional report that was published by the different mappers, including pro-Ukrainian, that the Russians managed to improve their positions, and currently the Ukrainians control just 30% of the village. As you can see, these territories were captured according to different mappers a long time ago, but as for pro-Ukrainian sources, just today the Russians managed to improve their positions a little bit. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Chasiv Yar direction, where very heavy clashes are taking place. The Russians are bombing the main citadel of the central part of Chasiv Chasiv Yar, and basically this is the main stronghold of this direction. The Russians are bombing this territory heavily. The Ukrainians have some headquarters, command centers. There may be the concentration of forces or ammo depots in the warehouses. This video confirms that the Russians are getting closer and closer exactly to this territory. And the most important, if we increase the numbers of updates, let's say since the beginning of August, we might see that this industrial zone was bombed heavily. Almost every single square centimeter was attacked by the Russians since the beginning of August. As for the battles for flanks, the Russians continue pushing Ukrainian forces, and today we have additional report from pro-Russian mappers that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to leave the borders of this stronghold and to enter the forest. And currently there are very heavy clashes for this, the last, let's say, position of the armored forces of Ukraine in the vicinity of Grigorivka, that is located on the Russian side of Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. Furthermore, very reliable sources reported that the Russians managed to cross Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal in two places, and that the Russians are forming currently the foothold in the bridgeheads in the southern part of the Chasiv Yar and in the northern one. Now let's move further. As for Sivers, nothing special, and now we are coming to the southern Kupiansk direction, where during the previous 24 hours, according to different mappers, the Russians managed to break through the Ukraine defense belt, and basically the defense of armored forces of Ukraine collapsed completely. For example, the pro-Ukrainian mappers reported that the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. Most likely, this map confirms not that Ukrainians were defeated and lost like thousands and hundreds of soldiers. Most likely, this map confirms the statement that we discussed here 5 minutes ago about that Syrsky is bringing forces to the Kursk direction and to the Pokrovsk direction from everywhere, and most likely some of the soldiers, some of the brigades and battalions from the southern Kupiansk direction were redeployed in these directions. For example, currently, if we believe the report of Deep State, the current distance between the edge Russian positions and the village of Nevska is less than 1 kilometer, which means that most likely during the next 24 hours the Russians will take under control the entire village, which will allow the Russians to maintain the line of combat contact and to connect the front lines between the village of Makeyevka and the village of Nevska. And this is obviously significant progress of the armored forces of Russian Federation. This will allow them to release additional forces and to begin additional movements further in the southern direction towards the village of Novosadovo, Terny, Yampolovka and Tarskoye. As for this direction, the Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours also, according to pro-Ukrainian mappers, managed to improve their positions to counterattack the Russian forces and to force the Russians to leave this area. Once again, this information was confirmed by pro-Ukraine mappers, for now without any geolocations. Now let's move further and let's talk about the flower of Peshchano, which is continue blooming. Today we got additional report that the Russians, according to pro-Ukrainian mappers, managed to improve their positions further in the direction of the river of Oskol, and this is just additional progress according to pro-Ukrainian mappers. And as for pro-Russian mappers, they stated significantly bigger report, significantly bigger advance of the armored forces of Russian Federation, and according to pro-Russian sources, all these fields were captured by the Russians during the previous night and during the previous 24 hours. And currently the distance between edge Russian positions and the village of Kolesnikovka is less than 2 kilometers, which is already a very critical situation for the Ukrainians. Now let's move further and let's talk Volchansk. We haven't been talking about the city for a very long period of time because we haven't received any interesting updates, but today we got additional reports from pro-Russian sources, and as you can see we have changes on the ground. The Russian sources published the video of how they were bombing and attacking the northern part of Volchansk, and as you can see the Russians were bombing the citadel part, the main stronghold of the city, and the Russians were bombing the aggregate plant. Based on this video we can make a conclusion that most likely the Ukrainians, as a result of counterattacks, managed to force the Russians to fall back these ruins, to retreat from these ruins, and the Ukrainians restore control over this part. Anyway, Volchansk is already reduced to ruins, so the Russians, as I understand, decided to fall back to optimize the line and to save the personnel and not to stay among the ruins, because there are very high risk of being attacked by the Ukrainians. Now let's move further to the Kursk direction where the clashes continues. Today we got additional geolocations and videos. Let's start start from the southeastern part. For example, in this video we can see the process how the Russians were clearing the farms that located to the west of the village by the name of Spalne. As a result of attack, the Russians managed to take these farms under complete control and to capture significant number of prisoners of war. This video confirms additional Russian progress, and this video confirms complete control over this territory that we have already colored already yesterday. As for the city of Sudzha, there are no changes, nothing special, and additional reports are coming from the northern and from the western directions. As for the northern direction, the Russians continue attacking the Ukrainian forces. For example, in this video we can see a Ukrainian convoy that most likely was planning to retreat or to evacuate, trying to escape a possible cauldron, but the Russians managed to discover the formation of this convoy, and the Russians destroyed it as a result of drones and FPV drone attacks. Furthermore, we have additional reports from the village of Kremennoye, because there are very big differences between different mappers regarding this territory. For example, the pro-Ukrainian mappers are saying that the village of Kremennoye is located in complete encirclement by the armored forces of Ukraine. So they show this map and they show that the village of Kremennoye is encircled. As for the military summary map, we show that the village of Malaya Lokny is encircled, and as for the villages like Vetrina, Zhabolovka, Durovka and Zhuravli, these villages under complete Ukrainian control, at least according to Deep State. So we have received lots of geolocations, for example from Olgovka, how the Russians were counterattacking the Ukrainians. So very interesting map update. Let's wait for additional geolocations, and if Deep State or any other source is able to provide us additional updates, of course we will change the map in someone's favor. Now let's talk about Lyubimovka. There are very heavy clashes in this area. During the previous few days the Russians managed to answer the village, and today we start receiving the videos of how the Russians were bringing additional reinforcements and reserves on the territory of this small settlement with the purpose to concentrate the critical mass and then to move further in the western and the southwest, in the eastern and in the southeastern directions. In this video we can see significant number of tanks that were entering the village of Lyubimovka. So once again there are very heavy clashes, but yet we haven't received even a single report that the Russians managed to cross the river of Ksagas from this area. Also, the sources reported that currently there are very heavy clashes for the village of Nikolaeva Darina. So the Russians, as we understand, are trying to improve their positions and to take under control the territory along this river of Snagas, and maybe to cross the river somewhere in this direction as well. Now let's talk about Glushkova. The Ukrainian sources published the satellite photo of the significant number of pontoon bridges along the river of Seym. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, up to 10 pontoon bridges were calculated and discovered by the Ukrainians, which is obviously impossible to take under control everything. It's impossible to destroy them all. The Russians have no problem with the logistic. The Ukrainians lost their time. The Ukrainians should have begun attack probably 2 weeks ago, or maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, but for some reason the Ukrainians decided to play with the Russians, and when the time come to the beginning of the Ukrainian offensive operation, we see that Ukrainians are completely unprepared for such a resistance from the Russian side, but on the other hand we see that the Russians are prepared well. For example, during the previous 20th night we got additional videos of how the Russians continue destroying and attacking Ukrainian vehicles that are heading in the northern direction, and basically for the 4 days of Glushkova offensive operation, the Ukrainians haven't managed to get anything. Yes, they're trying to attack, but they're suffering losses, because if we compare the current status of Ukrainian offensive in Glushkova with the Sudzha, after the 4th day the Ukrainians have already established complete control over the city of Sudzha, and as for this direction we see that the Ukrainians still haven't managed to cross the border and to create more or less reliable defense positions on the Russian side. It's, let's say, nonsense, and obviously this operation is not going to give the seeked Ukrainian results. And that's it for the short video. Military summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.